Alrighty. Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Monterey Bay Aquarium here live all across the internet. And actually, I should mention not only the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but also the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute and their social media pages. My name is Patrick. I work at the aquarium in social media. Joining me from her home a few miles away, we have Emily. Emily, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am fantastic, Patrick. Thank you so much for asking.
Oh, fantastic. You got to be squidding me. That's two
I should
puns
have
right
said
off the bat
incredible.
right there. And joining us, you may have heard some other laughter there. Thankfully, it was laughter on the other side of this stream. We have Dr. Chrissy Hufford joining us from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. That's where she works. Chrissy is at her home right now. And Chrissy, how are you doing today?
I'm well, and I hope everybody else is out there too. I know this is a really complex time for everybody, so I am hoping to bring some joy and learning to our listeners today.
All right. And just very quickly, folks, if you are tuning in, if you can just let us know in the chat if you can hear us, if we're sounding okay to everybody. Just want to know that you folks can hear us and listen to us. Emily, how are we looking in the chat so far? Folks tuning in, we're looking good?
Looks like folks can hear us. Sounds great. Looking good. Had to reset the pun count over in Twitch for a
Okay.
brand new day, brand new stream, brand new puns.
Brand new puns, right? Okay, well, so welcome everyone to this special edition of Mysteries of the Deep from Home. For those of you who are tuning in here for the first time, this is a collaboration here between the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And just to introduce you a little bit about who the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute is, and I'll be shortening that to MBARI for the rest of the time. MBARI is located about 20 miles north from the aquarium at the in Moss Landing at the head of the Monterey Submarine Canyon. If you've ever driven by the Monterey Bay area, you might recognize that power plant there in the background. We've got the Rachel Carson, one of MBARI's research vessels there, and you can see that power plant there in the background. Here's the RV Western Flyer, the other research vessel, a big research vessel that MBARI has. Aboard these vessels are what's known as ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles. These robots go underwater thousands and thousands of feet deep. That was the ROV Ventana. This is the ROV Doc Ricketts. Doc Ricketts can go down about 11,000 feet as far as I remember. And Doc Ricketts and Ventana are down there in the deep sea, piloted by expert pilots there from aboard the ship. And sitting in the control room are scientists just like Dr. Crissy, who's joining us here, observers and many other folks there looking at what's happening there in the deep sea. So that's where these videos are coming from, is from those remotely operated vehicles. And again, we are studying what's happening right out here in the Monterey Bay Submarine Canyon. And we have this wonderful fly-through animation to show you. So there's Monterey on the left. There's Moss Landing there in the center. Santa Cruz across the bay. Hey, Santa Cruz. And zooming down into that Monterey Submarine Canyon. At its deepest point, it is 2 miles deep of water, basically a mile from the canyon rim into the deep. So just like the Grand Canyon there, about a mile deep with an extra mile of water stacked on top of it. So basically we have the Grand Canyon underwater in our backyard, and that is where these animals here that we're going to be talking about are found amongst many other places around the world. So we're going to be talking about deep sea cephalopods today here with Dr. Crissy. Crissy, can you introduce us to your work, what you do, and a little bit of your career studying these animals?
Well, I started off studying cephalopods as during a college internship at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, and I learned about cephalopod taxonomy, or describing species, and specifically of octopuses, and then studied their behavior, the live octopuses in Indonesia and Australia and throughout the South Pacific after, or when I was in grad school after undergrad, and have since just really been interested in how they survive in the natural world, how they survive in changing habitats, and how they interact with broader ecology. At MBARI, I actually study deep sea carbon cycles, so it's not directly what cephalopods do to survive, but I stay active through collaborations, studying cephalopods throughout the world.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Emily, do we have any questions here in the chat so far that we really wanted to get out of the way before we really dive in here to the cephalopods? Seeing anything
You
out
know
there?
what? Yeah. I actually think that this is a great one to start out with because a lot of folks right now are sharing what their favorite cephalopods are, all
Ooh,
those
yeah.
octopus, squids, and cuttlefishes around the world. Chrissy, what is your favorite cephalopod?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are lots of really great ones, but I think my favorite one would have to be the one that I know best, Abdopus aculeatus. Its common name is the algae octopus. It's sometimes also known as the day drop arm octopus. And that's a small species that lives in Indonesia, the Philippines, Australia, Okinawa, in Japan. And that is a social octopus that has really complex behavior and body patternings. Males fight over females. It can walk bipedally on two of its arms. And so it's been used as an interesting model for inspiring some soft robotics. And it's really an animal that was pretty poorly known until the past, in the about 15 years ago. And now it's shown us a lot of things we didn't know existed for cephalopods.
Wow. And so Abdopus, they're a shallow water species. Do you have a
Hmm.
favorite deep sea
A favorite
cephalopod that you've seen so
deep
far?
sea cephalopod?
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many. I think Grimalda toothus is a really fascinating species. There's so much that we don't know about it, and yet it's given us little glimmers into its behavior and biology. It has a tentacle that, at the end of its club, it seems to move that club back and forth in a little bit in a way that actually looks like a small squid,
Okay.
and it might be mimicking small squid that might be prey to some of the species that it eats.
Well,
So
so
is it?
yeah, so Chrissy, you just mentioned that. So I've been playing a huge montage here of different deep sea cephalopods. Right now, we've got an umbrella octopus. We had a Dumbo octopus a little bit earlier. We had a Flapjack
Yeah.
octopus a little bit earlier. If any of you folks have any questions about what specific species you just saw, let us know what timestamp it was playing at. But the Grimalda toothus, the Grimalda toothus, I have that video lined up, so I'll play that right now if we want to talk more about that. But wait, you had a question first?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to say my video of the feed is frozen, so I'm not really able to see exactly what you're seeing
Oh, okay.
at the same time. And so maybe if you put in the chat things that are coming up, I'm going to try refreshing the page and see if that works.
Yeah, someone did a great job describing which octopus they were curious about. Well, the one with the webbing in between the arms. So I'm pretty sure they mentioned that right after the vampire squid was up there, Chrissy, if you wanted to talk about the vampire squid.
Okay, we're
Okay.
back to vampire squid. No, just good to know.
Just making your job more difficult here,
No, it's all
Patrick.
good. We're coordinating across many different places here. Just want to make sure, that the stream health is good for people. Let's do vampire squid away from
Okay,
our Starotoothus. So now we're on Vampirotoothus, and I'll keep vampire
Yes.
squid up.
Thanks. And so the vampire squid is actually not exactly a squid. It's closely related to, it's an octopod, which means that it has 8 arms but no tentacles, which squid and cuttlefish have. And the vampire toothus is probably closely related to an ancestral form of cephalopod. And they live in the midwater. They are incredibly beautiful. They, unlike their name, they actually do not suck blood. They seem to eat marine snow, which is, if you see all the specks in the water column, those little white specks, those are bits of marine snow or bits of dead plankton and zooplankton, body parts, fish scales, stuff that sinks from the surface down through the water column. That's the food for animals in the deep sea. And the vampire squid seems to eat that food. Most cephalopods are predators, eating other animals that are still alive. The vampire squid seems to eat bits of biological material, marine snow, that was once alive but is not alive now.
That's interesting, and I have that video footage right now up on the screen in case it's not live right away for you all. But of that vampire squid eating that larvation sinker. Now, larvations, for those of you that are just tuning in, not familiar with that term, larvations are a type of gelatinous animal that lives in the water column. They're actually closely related to people, believe it or not. And what you're looking at right here is that tadpole-like larvation swimming around. They're a urochordate, so when they're younger, they have the beginnings of a spinal cord. They have some of a spinal cord there. And they produce these incredible mucus nets that gather food out of the water. They have basically this massive big net around that's a filter to help get rid of larger particles, and they have that internal net there that helps them gather up even smaller little bits of food. And when they discard that net, when it gets clogged, they leave, they go make another one, but then that net sinks. And you can see here, that's a larvation sinker there. So that discarded mucus net, basically a huge booger that is gathering up little bits of food as it sinks down into the deep sea. And that is some research that was recently done by the folks at MBARI trying to figure out, okay, what do vampire squid eat? And if you take a look right here, you can see on the vampire squid, the feeding filament there that is sticking out there, sort of like a little tentacle that's sticking out, whipping into the water, gathering up that marine snow that's around it, those floating bits of detritus. And here is that vampire squid, again, eating that larvation sinker right there. So Crissy, I just played the full story there in a row. That way people had it. Thank you for the explanation. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We had a great observation by someone over on Twitch about their eyes. Crissy, in all these videos, they look very, very blue. And they were wondering, is that the actual color of their eyes, or is that just a reflection of our ROV lights?
You know, they look blue when we look at them. And I honestly, I don't remember. I don't know exactly. I think maybe Katie Thomas, who is she studies visual ecology and biology of cephalopods. Her work might be able to lead us to, find that answer. We might look to her work to find that answer, but I don't actually know how clear or colored the vampire toothless eye is. Suze, do you know? Is she on here? I don't know.
Okay.
That's a perfectly reasonable.
Perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
But something to point out though, that is the reflection of the ROV lights there in the eye. So in case you folks were looking,
sparkly.
Yeah, you can actually see the ROV there
ROV.
in the eye. Yeah, in case you're wondering. Actually, I'll let this video play out to the end, and you'll see there. Look at those ROV lights right there. Awesome. Great stuff. Emily, any questions that we have? Any questions coming in from the folks out there in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I know this is a bit more of a question that we've answered a couple of times, but I've seen a couple of arguments happening in chat, so I want to clear it up for all of us right now, Patrick.
Got to keep the peace, or the Pisces, as it were.
What is the correct term for the plural of octopus?
Oh, Crissy.
Octopuses.
Octopuses. You heard it here first.
And there's a kind of a complex answer to that. Technically, it's the word octopus has a Greek root, not a Latin root, and so the plural octopi is just not correct. Technically, because it's a Greek root, the plural would be octopodes, octopodes. But because octopuses refer to a smaller group of cephalopods compared to the larger group octopods within the group Octopoda, it would be very confusing to use the plural octopodes because we already use the term octopods to mean a more inclusive group. And so Vampiroteuthis is an octopod, but it's not an octopus. And so that's why we use the term octopuses.
Well, there we go. And yeah, so for those of you folks that are out there arguing, just so you know, if you have a friend that just absolutely cannot give up octopi, just ask them to bake you 8 pies and you'll be fine, right? Just like That's the cost to use octopi, but we use octopuses
There
at
you
the
go.
aquarium. Absolutely, yeah. So we use
Or,
octopuses, and this is
or
a
maybe
great way.
3.14.
Yeah, or 3 point. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 20
Yeah.
something squared you'll get, or 20 something rounded you'll get your octopi right there. Great stuff. Okay, so I do want to go back, Crissy, very quickly because I'll pull up this video. It's quite long, and it was put together by the fantastic video team over at MBARI, and it is that video of Grimaldoteuthis that you were mentioning before. So that is now currently playing, and if you're wondering what the black bars are on the side, this was taken back when it was 4:3 aspect ratio, everybody, so remember those days. But here's that squid there with those long tentacles. Can you describe a little bit more of that behavior you were mentioning about squid within a squid there, squidception, as it were, with Grimaldoteuthis?
So I'm not able to see the video right now on my computer. I have a very slow home connection
no worries.
that's having a hard time. But so what that is you'll see the squid is dangling its tentacles in front of him. Those are the two long appendages. Squids have 8 arms, which are the shorter ones with hooks, and then the 2 really long ones that are very thin along their base. They don't have suckers along their length, but they do have suckers or hooks at the very edge. You see like a little club-like bit at the end of that long stringy appendage. That's the tentacle. And if you see, I can't quite see if it's showing up, but that seems to be flapping. That squid flaps that little bit back and forth, and it kind of looks a little bit like a juvenile squid. And some context here, cephalopods are highly cannibalistic. And so it would almost act like a lure to have that little miniature squid there at the end of its tentacle. And if a fish or another squid comes up to eat that little baby squid at the end of its tentacles, that Grimaldoteuthis is really well positioned to eat it. And so just about anything in the ocean that can catch a squid or an octopus will eat it. So having a very baby squid at the end of your feeding appendage, which is, squids catch their prey with their tentacles, that's a really powerful lure. So what's fascinating about this behavior is that we are able to look at this and think that it kind of resembles a baby squid. Now, this could be a visual form of mimicry in the deep sea where there's not much light. It's also possible that it's creating some sort of mechanical disturbance that mimics a baby squid. But either way, deep sea squid actually use mimicry. This one might be using it to find food. Other squids can use mimicry as a form of defense. But it's very interesting that deep sea squid actually use visual forms of mimicry communication below where there's really much light. So that's a bit of a conundrum.
That is absolutely fascinating. I hadn't even thought about that particular aspect of like, oh, of course it looks like a baby squid, but no, if there's not a lot of light there in the deep. I do want to point out right now that the video is showing just how crystal clear this squid is as well. So you actually had a really good look there at the feather-like gills there called ctenidia there of the squid. And can you tell us about this weird tail that it has? There's a lot of weird squid that have those weird tails there in the back, projection sticking off the back of those fins there. So not only do you have that bizarre-looking appendage that could be there, that mimicry, but can you tell us a little bit about that tail end? Some people might be wondering.
Yeah, I honestly don't have a good explanation for that in this species. There are several deep sea squid that have really ornate fins and like parts of their tail end. And, I don't know if it helps with drag or somehow helps with breaking up the physical disturbance signature of the water. I don't know if it's mimicry in some way. I really don't know. I think that's for somebody watching this right now, maybe figures this out one day.
Yeah, and I've just pulled up here the corkscrew squid, the Planktoteuthis, and I know that there's
Yeah.
also the swordtail squid, Chiroteuthis, that I'll
Mm-hmm.
play over here
Mm-hmm.
next. Just a quick shout out to our amazing aquarist Alicia Batondo, who did some research there on the swordtail squid, I believe, and about how
Mm-hmm.
that tail off the end might help the squid try to look a little bit more like a siphonophore. So I'm going to pull up a siphonophore, everybody. Siphonophores are kind of one of the big predators that you find in the deep sea. They're long, basically a long rope of jellyfish. And so all of those are stinging tentacles that you see right there. And these things will gather food up out of the water. And so if you've got a lot of those predators out there around you, as a squid, as you were mentioning, Crissy, as a potato chip of the sea, basically, for so many animals, it might help you to try to look a little bit more like a siphonophore in profile, like a stinging jelly. So that could be what this corkscrew squid that's up on screen is doing there. So did you have anything else to add
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic story. There, Alicia's work and also work by Ben Burford, who was an intern at MBARI, have really shined some interesting light on this species. It mimics the siphonophores, not just in how it looks, but it also actually sits in the water column in the same way, orients its body in the same way that the siphonophores do. So it's mimicking so many different aspects of this behavior by siphonophores, which are, kind of drifting. So
Wow.
you'd think that the siphonophores wouldn't necessarily be controlling their own body position very much. Maybe they are, maybe the currents are controlling them based on their shape. But the Chiroteuthis has picked up on this enough and that it's actually influenced the trajectory of its evolution toward mimicking this unpalatable food animal in the wild.
Yeah, and so folks, you see there that that Chiroteuthis, that swordtail squid. Here's potentially what it could be mimicking here. Here's one of the most common siphonophores we find out here. Nanomia is the mid-water siphonophores. You can see it there hanging in the water column vertically, just like that squid was. So really, really interesting stories there. Emily, let's go to the chat. What are the folks saying? What are the folks asking?
We had someone give us a timestamp of one of the cephalopods they were curious about, Patrick.
Yes.
And I believe it is the Japatella.
Ooh, I'll pull it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If I'm doing myself, my brain justice here, I
Yeah.
believe that's Japatella that they were pointing out at the 6-minute mark. The Mid-Water Octopus, yes, that's the one there.
Yeah, so we've got both sort of the adult version there with the red coloration. Then we've got this perfectly see-through, beautiful jeweled version there. Can you tell us a little bit about the mid-water octopus Japatella, Crissy?
So Japatella is a fascinating species. If you see, I don't see it on the video now just because of it's slowed down a bit, but those individual little dots that are visible on the one and a little bit they're visible on the other video clip as smaller pinpoints, those are chromatophores. They are the pigment sacs that cephalopods use to control their body color, and they're more expressed on the one video. They're bigger, they cover more of the body. I think that's what the adult version is, and it might even have eggs in it. I don't couldn't quite tell when it was on my screen before. The other version, the juvenile, has those spots that don't seem to be quite as well developed. And in general, a lot of cephalopods, when they're very small, very young, living in the plankton, have very few chromatophores and very clear bodies, very gelatinous kind of jellyfish-like forms. Japatella actually retains that juvenile-like form in its adult form, and it has actually evolved this continuation of the juvenile form into adulthood, maybe just because it really makes sense from an energetic standpoint. Yep, I see the adult here now. Um, to just be more like a juvenile. And that's a process called paedomorphism. It's a
Interesting.
paedomorphic cephalopod that retains its juvenile body form in adulthood.
Wow. That's fascinating. So great job on the people out there on the stream finding the
Yeah.
timestamps with the stories. Great job
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Anything else there? Emily, just very quickly for the folks that are watching thematically, I'm going to switch over down to some benthic cephalopods. We've been up in the water column this whole time, but just wanted to go down here to the sea floor to point out that there are octopuses down there as well. Here we have, I believe, what is this is Opisthotuthis, the flapjack octopus here, and then I'll show you the Grimpoteuthis, the Dumbo octopus coming up here.
Patrick, that actually ties into a question that we got a bit earlier, this transition from looking at Japatella and that adult holding onto its eggs there to these benthic octopuses. Someone was wondering, how long do these octopus and squid live in the deep sea? And there's been a lot of incredible discoveries that have kind of coincided with that there, Crissy.
Yeah, and that's a question that a lot of researchers have had. In general, we don't really know the lifespan of most animals that live in the deep sea. But based on what we can glean from repeated observations, we can kind of get a sense, or certain aspects of an animal's lifespan are predicted to correlate with things like temperature and food availability. And so people had predicted for a long time that some deep sea cephalopods living in very cold water could live very long, 5, 10 years or longer. And some of that was supported by observations of brooding octopuses found in the Monterey Bay. And we were able to tell from looking at scars of individual female octopuses, that we could go back to the same female octopus over and over and over again. And Bruce Robeson went back to the same octopus over and over and over again for years and saw an individual female brooding for about 4 years. And so that's at least how long those octopuses brood their eggs. Then they hatch out and then have to grow into adulthood and mate and then brood again. So we don't really know how long their total lifespan is, but some of them can brood their eggs for many years. Now, this takes a really long time, obviously. And at that time, she is sitting there brooding her eggs, and she's vulnerable to being eaten because, remember, she's still a potato chip of the sea. And so, do cephalopods do things to try to speed up that brooding time? And there were some cephalopods, some octopuses that were found brooding in other parts of the world at warm seeps. And people hypothesized that this would maybe speed up the egg development time, so the females don't have to brood as long. In some of those places, those warm seeps had low oxygen, and so that was actually killing off the egg. So it wasn't really a perfect solution. But biologists from MBARI are looking at octopuses that brood on the Davidson Seamount right outside of the Monterey Bay to try to understand how oxygen availability and temperature and other factors relate to brooding time.
That's fascinating. Yeah, just to think about what it's like to be hanging out in one spot, taking care of your offspring. I think a lot of folks maybe tuning in right now can really relate to that, maybe now more than ever. I wanted to pull up here a map of the Davidson Seamount that you pointed out, and if I can figure out where to get my cursor here. Okay, got my cursor, everybody. So over here is the Monterey Bay Aquarium right there. There's where MBARI is located. You can see there that deep sea canyon heading out to sea, and then this massive mound here under the water, that is the Davidson Seamount that you were referring to there, Crissy. Remind me, is the Davidson Seamount, that's thought to be a big volcano, right, from back in the day?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure somebody knows, but
I'm sure somebody knows.
Good geologic understanding, but I don't know.
Chat, look it up. We're busy. We've got all of our screens occupied.
Yeah.
But while he's looking to tune in.
Yeah, go for it,
yeah,
Susan.
Please do.
Yes, so Davidson Seamount is an ancient underwater volcano. It's no longer active though.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. We
Thanks,
went
Susan.
we went to the phones and we got the answer. Thank you, Susan. You may recall Susan was on our live stream last
Thank
week.
you.
Awesome. Thank
I
you.
have used a lifeline.
Yes.
And so I also want to point out that one of the things that often comes up when people talk about these octomoms that brood for a really long time and they don't eat, often this is considered, the ultimate sacrifice. And it's true, they are spending the last portion of their lives brooding their young. And many of them stop eating. That's also something that naturally happens. Even if a female doesn't lay fertile eggs, she will still die at around that same time. And so it's not the brooding that causes the female to stop eating and eventually die. It's a natural progression of the lifespan. She'll stop eating and die even if she's not brooding eggs.
Gotcha. And that reminds me, I'm pulling up now a midwater species again, just leaving the benthic Granelodoni octopus that we've been playing. This is a midwater black-eyed squid that is brooding her eggs. And so you can really see how this mom is not going to be eating this whole time because she's holding on to her eggs there in between her arms. Her mouth is between all of those arms, so not feeding the whole time as she's holding on to those eggs there. And you can actually see a little baby go by there on the screen there. So you just reminded me of that video clip there, Crissy, about how they're not eating. This is their last act, but people wondered, where did midwater squid eggs go? And for some species, at least this particular species, they hold on to their eggs the whole time. So this is a diligent mother there.
Yeah, and some of those females actually lose their feeding tentacles. Their feeding tentacles fall off, so they can't even feed if they want to.
Wow. I didn't realize that at all. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Emily, let's go to the folks out there. What's going on?
Yes, lots of questions right now coming in about the size of these cephalopods that we're talking about, just how small they can get and how large they can get, Crissy.
That is a great question because, it's in the midwater, when you're looking at something on camera, it's hard enough to see size, to tell size, because you don't have stereo vision. But when something's in the midwater, we really lack reference. We don't necessarily even know exactly how close something is to the camera. Some of these squids are only an octopus, Japatella. Some of the ones we come across, they're an inch or two, maybe 3 inches long. They don't get very big. But some of, the deep sea squid on the whole, the colossal squid, is enormous. Gosh, I forget exactly what the record length of the colossal squid is in Architeuthis, but they get very long. The largest squid in the Monterey Bay area is, oh gosh, why am I blanking on its name?
I've got a Moroteuthis up on screen.
Moroteuthis,
Yeah, I've
yes.
got it up on screen right now.
Yes, Moroteuthis. I was wanting to say Mesoteuthis, but I knew that was not right. Moroteuthis gets to be, I think they get to be about 5 meters long at most. I think most of the ones that we might see on the video might be about 3 meters long, 10 feet long. But they do occupy the bay, and they are out there. They are our own version of the giant squid. I don't know how close the nearest Architeuthis or giant squid record, what's the closest Architeuthis record to the Monterey Bay? I don't know. Is that something that you have?
I don't have it here. I've heard, and maybe Susan can be another lifeline. I've heard stories though of the sperm whales that come here to the Monterey Bay, that there's a chance that they might be feeding on some giant squid that are out here. I don't know if a tentacle washed up near Santa Cruz or something sometime, or I don't know. Susan, do you know of records of giant squid from directly out here off of California? I know that they are.
I do know that one there, I think it was Sean Van Summeren and his group up in Santa Cruz. They actually did one time find a dead Architeuthis floating near outside of Monterey Bay.
Okay.
Thank you, Suze.
So there you go. So maybe, yeah, some giant squid. The Kraken is certainly out here potentially in the form of many different types of squid. And I just wanted to point out very quickly, Crissy, that this Moroteuthis video here, I wanted to give a shout out to one of our amazing interpreters who works with all of our volunteer guides here at the aquarium, Jane Silberstein, because she was actually live at the aquarium back in the day doing a 3-hour long discovery talk about the deep sea. So this ROV was down and in the auditorium of the aquarium. It was being broadcast live over to them. And this Moroteuthis came up on screen live while she was interpreting to the audience. So some of the audience got to watch this live, just like you folks are doing at home, but in our auditorium got to see this Moroteuthis live. And one of the things that the researchers mentioned at the time is that there's probably a whole bunch of these squid that are hiding out behind the ROV the entire time that we're diving. It's just very rare for them to go in front of the camera, because these animals obviously very diligent hunters. They're very keen on what's going on around them, and so who knows how many of these Moroteuthis are behind the ROV telling their friend, "Hey, go swim in front of it, see what happens." So hard to tell.
Yeah, video observations of Moroteuthis are extremely rare. I've seen one while I was of all the time I've spent in the control room, I've seen one, and MBARI does not have a lot of footage of them. It's a real treat to get to see them. But one way we might be able to understand how common they are is, number one, through stomach contents. If there's an animal that happens to eat a juvenile phase, or if somehow a whale researcher is able to understand the stomach contents of that whale. But researchers in the Monterey Bay Area, including researchers from MBARI in collaboration with the aquarium, are looking at what's called environmental DNA. And that's when you take water samples and look at the DNA that's in that water sample. And animals that have been through that area recently, we shed skin cells, fish shed scales, cephalopods shed their parts of their suckers on a regular basis, or just skin sloughs off, or mucus. And that leaves a signature in the water. Those cells are still there, and that DNA can be detectable. And so one of the ways we might be able to understand how common these are and where they're distributed, any seasonality, is to look for their DNA.
Right. And so I have up on the screen right now what's known as the Environmental Sampling Processor, or ESP, that MBARI has pioneered. There's a few different types, but it's basically a biochemistry lab in a can that can sample what's going on out there in the ocean in terms of the DNA. You can basically follow plankton blooms, or try to find certain animals that you might be looking for. And let's see, where can I'm trying to find it. Oh, over here. Here's a long-range AUV, or autonomous underwater vehicle, named Tethys. And you can actually attach little mini environmental sampling processors to the front of these robots that just go off, and you program them, and they can swim around and follow different things. So I've got just some of your tools there up on screen there, Crissy, of the AUVs, and we had some of the larger ESPs there. You can have little mini ones there on the front of these ones. So really awesome technology there to study what's going on out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that MBARI really specializes in. We've seen all this amazing footage, and as you can imagine, these very delicate, very shy, very elusive animals would not really show us their true colors if we were to bring them up in nets and try to study them in the lab. We really need to study them in their natural habitats to really get a full picture of what their lives are like, what their threats are, and what drives their survivorship. And so one of MBARI's main focuses is developing instruments that allow us to understand the ocean in the ocean. And so we focus on developing robots and instruments that don't necessarily even need a person. And so, for example, the AUV the autonomous underwater vehicle that looks kind of like a torpedo, that might swim in the midwater. We also have a benthic rover that is on the seafloor right now. I think of the Mars rover and the various moon rovers. We have one benthic rover on our ocean floor. Our entire global ocean has one rover that at this point has covered over 11 kilometers, surveyed 11 kilometers of the seafloor off our California coast. And
which is most of it. So we're almost done, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
11 kilometers, pretty much wrap it up next year, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more to learn.
Right.
Yeah. And so that we look at data from the rover, and the rover goes down for a year at a time at 4,000 meters off the Central California coast. And it's out there doing its thing. It doesn't go on lockdown. It doesn't get to work from home. Its home is on the sea, on the seafloor. We have time-lapse cameras that are taking a picture of the deep sea floor every hour, dating back to 1989. The rover and time-lapse cameras work at a site called Station M, which is a long-term time series site off the coast that's allowed us to understand how the deep sea changes over time in relation to changes in the environment, in relation to changes in surface waters and the climate. And it's given us this perspective that the deep sea is always changing. We can see that in midwater video transects. We can see that all the way to the deep sea floor. It's a very dynamic habitat that we really focus on studying in its natural state as best possible.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull up here sort of that seafloor area, not the same space that you would see for Station M, but just to kind of give folks an idea that once you get to the bottom of the ocean, there's still a lot of organisms doing their thing there. And while we do that, Emily, do we have any questions here? What's the world at large wanting to know?
Oh, we have lots of just people amazed by all the things that we are seeing up on screen right now. People all over the world. Just a shout out to a couple of places that I've seen floating by over there on the many different platforms, all 7 pages that we are live on right now. I saw people tuning in from Scotland and Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, all tuning in right now, as well as all across the United States, saying hello and just thank you so much for talking about cephalopods with us today, Crissy. We did have a question about Nautilus, and are they considered deep sea animals?
Well, that's a great question because it's subjective. What do you consider the deep sea? Where does the surface stop and the deep sea start? And people have different definitions of this. Some people go by how deep light can penetrate. Some people go by how deep divers go, scuba divers. So there's a bit of a gray area, but for the most part, Nautilus are, pretty deep. They're deeper than most divers can go, but some divers can reach them, and they go shallower during certain times of the day. I think it's nighttime that they come up. They don't go to the very deep sea because they would get crushed.
Yeah,
their shell wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah, I have a photo there of the Nautilus there up on screen. Just in case you were wondering what kind of animal that is, it's an ancient cephalopod with a shell. Back in the day, shelled cephalopods were some of the most successful organisms in the ocean. Tens of thousands of species of shelled cephalopod. Maybe one of the most famous you may have seen from a fossil dig or from our Animal Crossing live streams would be the ammonites. But the nautiloids have been around for a long, long time. I believe 500 million years. And there's one of our modern nautiloids there, Nautilus, up on screen. And I will take that away very quickly. I have a question for myself. I never actually watched this video clip all the way through. Can Susan or Crissy, who's this little roly friend that goes by right there on screen? Is
the
that
white spiky ball?
Yeah, the white spiky ball just rolling on by.
I was wondering
the
same thing. I saw someone else asking about the same thing. Yes.
Yeah, is that a sea pen? Is that an anemone? I don't recall ever watching this video all the way through. Susan, who is that?
Yeah, it's an anemone and we call it the pom-pom anemone. And
okay.
They roll along. And there's a cool story about them. The sea spiders, pycnogonids, will eat them and suck the goo out of their tentacles.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay, well we're pulling up sea spiders now.
I'm so delighted right now. Yes.
Here's a sea spider. Now, yeah, I was wondering who the roly friend was, and if that's a little anemone friend. Well, here is our sea spider friend, our pycnogonid. That is currently up on screen there. Yes, there are spiders in the deep. This is not an arachnid, FYI, so not closely related to the spiders that you may have on land that you may be naming in your own home, as I am at this point, as they're my only roommates. But yeah, there's that deep sea spider there up on the screen. Well, that's awesome. Okay, let me get us back over to the topic at hand. Thank you for talking about Station M, Crissy, and there is a great video on MBARI's YouTube channel about Station M right now. But I'm just going to go back here to some deep sea cephalopods. I'm going to put up our good friend, the Flapjack Octopus, Opisthotuthis, and Emily, more questions for us here.
Well, actually, I think when we were talking about the Nautilus there, Crissy, you brought up a great point, and we had a couple of folks asking in the chat, how does pressure affect the cephalopods in the deep sea?
It depends on the type of cephalopod. If any cephalopod that has an airspace like the Nautilus can't go very deep because that airspace will, compress and the shell will get crushed. Cuttlefish can't go very deep. Their shell will get crushed. So there are no deep sea cuttlefishes. Squids and octopuses and other octopods can go pretty deep because they don't have air spaces in their body. They don't have a swim bladder. They don't control their buoyancies with a gas bladder. And they control buoyancy with different levels of ammonia and other ions. And so they can go pretty darn deep.
That's amazing. And yeah, one other thing we should point out about deep sea cephalopods and pressure is that there are some species of cephalopod that you find in the deep sea, then you find near the surface. They kind of go up and down. And I'm going to pull up the Humboldt squid, Diciticus. Some of you folks may know it as jumbo squid, but you've got the Humboldt squid here up on screen, and these are active hunters that can go down into the deep, up to the surface, moving around, trying to find where their food is at, and they migrate up and down in the water column as their food does. So I've got that up on screen there. If you want to talk a little bit about Humboldt squid, there, Crissy.
Yeah, and there's something that's, so many things fascinating about the Humboldt squid, but one of the things to keep in mind is they're swimming up and down in the water column. They can go between, 800 meters deep all the way up to the surface, back down to 800 meters. And when they do this, they're traveling through a huge range of temperatures and oxygen concentrations. They actually hang out in the oxygen minimum zone where there's hardly even any oxygen there. And they're safe from predators that need a lot of oxygen, like tuna, for example. And it allows them to feed pretty well on the animals that can handle that zone. They're a pretty great predator in that way, very efficient, very effective. And so, the pressure changes in that distance that they travel are enormous, but they're also, I would say, going through even greater changes physiologically to accommodate these very drastic changes in temperature and oxygen that they're going through.
So it's sort of like they're scaling very, very tall mountains and going down very quickly at the same time. You can imagine if you, to go get a meal, had to scale up into Mount Everest territory in terms of oxygen depletion before you were able to go back home. That's kind of what these animals are doing every day for some of them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really great way of putting it.
And so speaking of squid cephalopods, we would be remiss if we didn't point out calamari or California market squid, which I currently have up here on screen. We've got a little squid squad going by right now. If you are familiar, if you are one of those folks out there that enjoys eating squid, it is often California market squid, also known as Doryteuthis, currently up on screen there. And actually the squid boats, I can see a squid boat right now from my house. Out in the Monterey Bay. Squid season is upon us, so there are some squid seiners that are out here in the Monterey Bay going after California market squid. So squid and cephalopods generally, but market squid in particular, one of those seafoods that you folks may be familiar with outside of just their role in the ocean there. All right, Emily, any questions for us here?
Yeah, got a couple of them for you, and actually, I think that we might have answered one of them just with the Humboldt squid video clip that you just played there, Patrick. The
awesome.
question was, do deep sea squid and octopus ever ink? And we just saw that with the Humboldt squid there. That yes, they do. Crissy, do you want to talk about inking in the deep sea?
Yeah, that's something that really surprised people. There was a woman here, Stephanie Bush, who studied at MBARI, studied inking in deep sea squid, and found that a number of deep sea cephalopods actually ink. And for a long time, people had thought that inking was primarily a visual defense. And why would you need that visual defense in the deep sea? But lots of different species of squid, some of them even have their own types of ink that are released into the water column. So you can swim along with the ROV, come across some squid ink, and based on its shape and color, know what type of squid released that ink.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so some of that ink might irritate potential predators. Some of it might have chemicals in it that might stun the prey or create a smoke screen to mask the cephalopod. All of the uses are, in general, not just deep sea squid and octopuses, the uses of ink in general by cephalopods are really not well studied. And so there are a lot of remaining questions about that.
And in that vein, I'm gonna pull up right now Galatoothus, the cockatoo squid that was actually the cover here for you folks who are watching the video. People saying, "Oh, look at that upside down potato" or whatever folks were looking at. But we've got here the cockatoo squid, and I'm gonna put up this video here of the cockatoo squid inking and apparently inking into its own body cavity there. If you want to talk a little bit about the cockatoo squid inking here. So it looks like it's filling up its body cavity with ink right now.
Yeah, and that's a curious behavior because the cockatoo squid and lots of other midwater squids are pretty clear. They're very transparent. But if you can see inside the squid, there's that vertical, it almost looks like a big, like good and plenty in there, like a big candy in there. That's the digestive gland. It's effectively its liver. And that is not transparent in cephalopods. It's very easy to see. And in some squids and octopuses, it's actually coated in a reflective layer. And so, no matter how transparent a cephalopod is, that digestive gland is very visible. And so, one of the hypotheses, is that Galatoothus will fill up its body with ink to try to mask that digestive gland and hide it, because that ink might be more closely colored to the background. And one of the catch 22s with this, though, is that maybe it protects them from a predator at one point, but I don't know if this is the case for this particular squid, but for many cephalopods, their own ink is actually poisonous to them. So if you have a home aquarium, or the aquarists at the Monterey Bay Aquarium have to be very careful of this. If a cephalopod inks in its own tank, it can kill that animal and can poison it. And so how long can this midwater squid actually keep this up and hold this ink inside its body without doing itself damage? That's an unknown.
Very, very interesting there. And so for any of the folks that are tuning in, if you are wondering, have we figured out everything that's happening in the deep sea with cephalopods? By no means. We're just barely scratching the surface. Every part of this presentation that we've been bringing up, all the information that Crissy has mentioned, there are still volumes and volumes more information to be figured out about the deep sea and about these animals. Crissy, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to try to study the deep sea when it is so big? You talked about that benthic rover that's covered 11 kilometers in the ocean. What is it like faced with the daunting task of trying to figure out what's going on in the Earth's largest habitat like this?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is scaling up. And because the ocean is so vast, we want to try to come up with ways of studying it that are really representative of the scales of animal ranges and the processes that we're looking at. And so we know that it's not realistic. We can't even get into the deep ocean ourselves as people. We focus more on putting our instruments in the water in order to scale up our observations, and we rely really heavily on robots. You have to I have a very shallow water background in my research, and I was used to being able to hop in the water on snorkel or on scuba to look directly and feel things, feel the currents moving. You can't do that. You have to use your um, remote senses and the robotic eyes and the robotic ears of the ocean to understand what's going on. And so that nurtures really creative collaborations with people with lots of different areas of expertise, engineers, ship's crew, people who have very different backgrounds, really have lots to add to the study of the deep sea, because this is an all hands on deck situation. No single perspective is going to give us the time and space understanding that we need in order to grasp what's happening on the entirety of the ocean.
That's awesome. Yeah. So for those of you folks out there interested in something to do, there's definitely plenty to do there in the deep sea. Going to Emily here, it looks like we've got about 3 minutes or so left here before we wrap up the hour. Do we have rapid fire questions here for Crissy, or a large philosophical question from the audience that we really
How
need
about
to address?
let's do 2 rapid fire ones of just identification
Yes.
of some of the animals that we just threw up on screen there, Patrick.
Okay.
One happened to be one of what I think is the cutest cephalopods in the world, the Piglet Squid you had up there just a moment ago.
Up on screen now, the banded Piglet Squid. I would choose this as our emissary to the global Senate if we needed it. Just sending our best many feet forward there.
Absolutely. And then we also had another question here, and I think this might be the kind of more philosophical ending question right now, Crissy, that what is the biggest threat to cephalopods right now, and what can we do to make sure that these amazing critters that we've been talking about all afternoon, what can we do to make sure that they are here to stay, that they are around for many generations to come?
I think the biggest threats to cephalopods in general is that their habitats are being compromised, and they're being compromised in lots of different ways. Some of them are being compromised by expanding dead zones in the ocean, or expanding oxygen minimum zones, areas that don't have any or have very low amounts of oxygen. And that's shifting around where predators are. There are some cephalopods that are threatened by habitat destruction from trawling, and there are some cephalopods that are threatened by habitat destruction from ocean warming, which changes their growth rates and food availability. In general, compared to a lot of other animal types in the ocean, cephalopods are actually doing pretty well. I think they are not going to be wiped out um, in the next 5 to 10 years. I think we can feel pretty confident that cephalopods are going to be around for a really long time. They're survivors. um, but I think in general we can really help take care of them by being conscious of the things we do to protect the ocean in general, being conscious of our energy use, which is pretty easy right now for us this month, but once we go back to our normal everyday lives, really paying attention to how much resources we use in this world. And I think that will help
Wonderful.
cephalopods.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for that, Crissy. Yeah, Emily, let us know what's
No,
going on.
I was just another thank you to Crissy. I saw even more people just sending in thank yous from around the world. Lots of teachers out there asking if these are going to be available after the stream to use, and absolutely, these with the Mysteries of the Deep programs, all of our live streams are always archived on our many different channels. This one you're going to be able to find on both the Aquarium and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute MBARI's Facebook pages, Periscope pages, and YouTube pages, as well as the Aquarium's Twitch channel. We'll have those out there as videos on demand for you to use anytime that you would like to in your classroom. And we just had people all over the world. I saw the Netherlands, Bangladesh, Denmark tuning in right now. We got, let's see here, from locally, we got some of our colleagues tuning in saying hello. Also, just a huge shout out I'd like to throw out there to Susan, one for being on the call with us today as our lifeline, but also So she's out there helping to answer questions in the chats right now with our colleagues, Cassie and George. So if you see people responding in the chats right now from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, those are our colleagues over there who are helping us make sure that we answer as many questions as we possibly can. So huge thank you and shout out to all of their help today, as well as, again, just a huge thank you for coming and chatting about cephalopods with us this afternoon, Crissy.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. Thanks everybody for attending. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Crissy. Thank you so much, Emily, for fielding those questions. Yes, thanks to all of our colleagues and to everyone who is tuning in from around the world, learning more about the deep sea cephalopods that we share our grand inner space of planet ocean with. It was so fun to be able to share all of these with you. Stay tuned for the next deep sea adventure, which will be next Thursday. So stay tuned to the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute's social media feeds that you will see there. And we will hope to see you again soon here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in the deep sea. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you again soon.
Bye.
That's right, Trooper. That's right, Trooper.
Bye.
That's
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
That was
Bye, everyone.
perfect.